Thank you, Betty.
You know, Betty, we're just sitting here watching her, but it's amazing how busy she is.
Oh, yeah, I can believe it.
Good morning, Dale W.
Good morning, Sharon.
Who's 908-528? That
Barbara. That's me, Barbara.
Oh,
Hi, Sharon. That's my cell phone.
Oh, okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
Sharon will say, who's there? Can't get away with them. No. Hello, Mary.
Good morning, Sari.
How are you? What is your morning?
Uta, good morning. Good morning.
This call is being recorded.
Good morning, everyone. Saturday, November 7th, 2015. Welcome this morning to our Bible study. And Mike today is our moderator. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you very much. First, the topic is Thou Art Bidden, and I'd like to read from Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures by Mary Baker Eddy. The harmony and immortality of man are intact. We should look away from the opposite supposition that man is created materially and turn our gaze to the spiritual record of creation, that which should be engraved on the understanding and heart with the point of a diamond and the pen of an angel. And the selected readings were from Luke 14:7-35. And first question is, what is the meaning of wedding?
Well, is that kind of like, what is the meaning of life?
Well, in the context of this parable, how is to wed or wedding meant?
That's a good question because Jesus gave these parables in metaphorical terms. What I got from wedding, from this context, was the invitation to be united. Of course, we know in reality we are united to our Heavenly Father. We're His image and likeness. All too often we need to do something in practical terms to realize that this unity does exist.
Well, also, a wedding is a big, very special event, and it's not like going to church every week, where in those days people bought their own pews so they knew exactly where to sit. When you go to a wedding, it's not always clear where you're supposed to sit, depending upon who you're related to or whether you're related to either the bride or the groom. So there's some question as to where some people are supposed to sit at a wedding. Nevertheless, it's a big special event. It's an important event. And it's a divinely sanctified event.
In the Webster's Dictionary, to wed is to unite closely in affection, to attach firmly. And in Matthew Henry, I read that this parable speaks to the general neglect of the Jewish nation to unite or agree with Christ.
That's very nice.
Yeah. I'll read a few things what Mrs. Eddy says in a message, page 153 of Miscellany. She says, Christian Science healing is the Spirit and the bride, the Word and the wedding of this Word to all human thought and action that says, come, and I will give thee rest, peace, health, holiness. And then also in Miscellaneous Writings 151, glorious things are spoken of you in his word. Ye are a chosen people whose God is what? Even all. May mercy and truth go before you. May the lamp of your life continually be full of oil, and you be wedded to the spiritual idea Christ. Then you will heal and teach and preach on the ascending scale of everlasting life and love. She says quite a bit if you look through on wedding, wed. Of course, the fidelity, her article on fidelity about the 10 foolish virgins has something to do about that, bride and bridegroom, and being alert, having your oil full, replenished. Anyway, it's interesting what she says, and we should be aware of it. The real wedding is with the Word of God, the wed in that respect. But in this parable, it goes back to what Gary said.
It also strikes me that at times Christ was called the bridegroom.
Yes, and you know, Mrs. Eddy's definitions in the glossary, if you don't know those two, of bride and bridegroom, they're important to know and think about. I know at one time, quite some time ago, I was given that if you ever, feel you need companionship, or if you have maybe a son or daughter who you think are getting involved with someone maybe they shouldn't be, work with those definitions of bride and bridegroom in the glossary. I've seen it in my own life bring wonderful results.
Thank you very much.
Tom, were you going to say something?
Oh, I just listened to all this, and I think it's fascinating that the word wedding was used. I'm so glad for this question because, at first glance when you read through this, it could be like when thou art bidden of any man to a banquet or a feast or family get-together or something like that, But what we're saying is this just wasn't any get-together. The special invitation. So as people were saying, it's like you're being invited to be with Christ. This is something very special.
Thank you.
I came across, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I came across an article I thought was really interesting that talked about the garments that you would wear to a wedding, and it really talked about the joy and gratitude and expectancy of good, and that you're coming to contribute and willing to join. So it's a sense of participation, too. There was another a little paragraph in the Apocalypse in Science and Health that I don't think was shared yet. It says, come hither, arise from your false consciousness into the true sense of love, and behold the Lamb's wife, love wedded to its own spiritual idea. Then cometh the marriage feast. For this revelation will destroy forever the physical plagues imposed by material sense.
Thank you. Also in miscellaneous writings on page 285, there's a whole chapter there on wedlock. If you're not familiar with it, it's a good one to be familiar with. And then also in miscellany on page 268, prevention and cure of divorce. So in these books, Mrs. Eddy has the answers to everything, and all based on the Bible.
Are there any other comments on wedding? Shall we move on to the next question then?
Sure.
I just, 1 second, I just feel that for me, to continually remind myself of this weddedness to the Christ is what reminds me of that unity with God, never separated from Him, as has been mentioned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's throughout the New Testament, isn't it? The writings of Paul and others talk about the importance of marrying the Christ or being wedded to the Christ. Yeah.
Sorry, I guess.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Hey.
Go ahead.
Well, Zari and Uta keep getting disconnected, so it's the noise.
Our Skype is getting unskyped.
So they've gone to the computer.
Okay, so moving on to question number 2. What kind of a person is an honorable man? And I could have worded that. What kind of a person does the honorable man represent?
In the connotation of this that we're studying right now, that we're looking at, one who feeds the poor and hungry before he invites the rich ones who will pay him back with a similar invitation. The poor and hungry are appreciative, but cannot return the favor, and they humbly are thankful.
Thank you.
Beautiful. That's a good thought.
Beautiful thought. I thought it represented someone who was gladly willing to accept this invitation to be with Christ. What kind of a person was that? Because obviously the Jews had rejected Jesus, his teachings, even though they were bidden to join with him. So it talks about what kind of person was receptive to the Christ, not rebellious against it.
Well, it's interesting because, he is speaking here to the Pharisees. This parable is shared when he's in the home of one of the Pharisees for a meal. And, of course, you can just imagine the setup there. There's the host in the center. This is how it's described, at least, what these setups were like. And the Pharisees would have the seats right there next to the host. And what's the first thing he's telling them is this parable about the wedding, and do not sit down in the highest room, lest a more honorable man than thou. And they're probably thinking, well, who's more honorable than me? So
Right.
Here he's really trying to teach this lesson about what does it mean to really be an honorable individual.
Yeah, honorable in the sight of God, as opposed to being honorable in the sight of men.
And if the Pharisees are thinking in terms of being honorable in the sight of men, there's always going to be somebody, quote, higher ranking or what have you than you are. And well, this is really good lesson for him.
In case of in the case of a wedding, a closer relative, perhaps.
Well, in the case of this parable of the wedding, it's the bride's father who sponsors the wedding, right? And the spiritual interpretation of that is who is the bride's father? Who determines who is honorable? God. So a more honorable man is the man who is honorable in God's sight. God being the judge. Because if we judge ourselves honorably in our own sight, well, that's pretty bad self-deception, isn't it? That's kind of the theme of this lesson.
Yeah. That's all just a bit.
Well, this is what he says to someone like that. And he says, he that bade thee and him come and say to thee, give this man place, and thou begin with shame to take the lowest room. Which, he explains down in verse 11. Whosoever exalteth himself shall be abased.
And so all of this, how do we apply it to ourselves?
It's a lesson again about humility.
Yeah, sure is.
So we are.
Yeah, and how we place ourselves, right?
Yes.
And think about it. When you go anywhere, do you right away try to be the head honcho? Take control of the situation. Your ideas are the best, even though you might be totally new to a place. It's always being sensitive to those around you. It is. That's exactly right. You should enter any situation with some degree of humility. Just get a feel of what's going on before you decide that you're the one everyone has to listen to. I mean, I've seen this happen, and what usually happens to those people is what?
They're brought down.
All right, they are. They end up getting humiliated.
Yeah, they blow themselves away.
Yeah,
and they usually offend the people around them, and lose any type of respect quickly and easily. Sometimes if it's a boss or a manager who even comes into a new situation, they're the new ones, but they're the boss. And if they come in with this righteous attitude, it doesn't usually go well.
Great example.
Yeah.
You're not tuning
By the
in
way,
needs.
However,
was it?
if he comes in with the attitude that we're all equals and we all are obedient to God's direction, that really sets the tone for progress, doesn't it?
And unity, yes.
Yeah, and unity. Yeah, you come in as a servant. One of the chief characteristics of Jesus was he was a servant.
One of the chief characteristics of any good leader, that he or she is a servant.
Oh, there's more to know that you don't know all of it. I don't know, the word fustian comes back again. Jeremy's word is a bombastic, that bombastic so-and-so gets in there and thinks he's it,
I'm so glad you think of me when you think of that word.
Because you went at it on the forum, that's why.
Well, so think about it. And one of the reasons I like that Una Willard's writings, they're on our website. But, she talks about when you come to any situation, you present, you give out an odor. Is it one of humility and sweetness and joy, cooperation, or are you stinky because you're full of self and pride and self-righteousness? People will feel it. We're all mental. And I thought that was great. What Dede says is so true. You get a new boss, and they come in with an arrogant attitude, like they know it all, and they don't listen to the people that have been there for years.
And they wonder why productivity went down.
Yeah, right. Right, and nothing's getting done. And this is a very important parable. It really is.
Nobody wants to work with you.
Yeah.
And then they're put to shame and taken to, it's not lower room, it says the lowest room.
Yeah.
So be careful when you exalt yourself.
It's tough when you find out you're not the man.
Well, I don't have that experience. Oops.
That brings something upon yourself that you have to handle then. You do.
Oh, huge.
Huge amount of dislike and resentment, and yeah, in any situation. And I mean, to some degree, we have seen it in our church. People come in thinking that they know everything and they're going to tell us what to do. I mean, at least take a few weeks to find out what's going on here. Start preaching to us on the very first day. I mean, it isn't too well.
And it's a quality that Jesus mentions again and again. I mean, he talks about the Pharisees so often, how they like to take, the finest robes and have the greetings in the marketplace, that they have to, be the highest in every situation.
Yeah, thank you.
So we are judging honor as being, with the material sense of things. I have this, I have that, so I'm honorable. Yeah.
And Jesus set the example by washing the disciples' feet.
Yes. Mm. How do you think a person can be that way? I mean, to most people with any sense of humility at all, it's bombastic is the word. I'm just curious as to.
You can get in a certain mindset. Also, you can be with a group of people like the Pharisees.
Oh yeah, and you're all
better than other people. You're more important.
I think people get that way when they accomplish a lot of humanly acceptable things, like if they have way too much education, or if they are humanly, competitive and win at things, whether it's sports or business or or whatever, or in society, or if they get elected, to positions in the DAR or the local Kiwanis Club or, that sort of thing. They get exalted in a human way. It's easy for some people to think that they're hot stuff.
But they're better than other people somehow. They're in a better group.
Exactly.
I'm sorry.
Well, to me, it shows a huge insecurity, doesn't it?
Yes.
That was what I was going to say. I've seen the most insecure people feel this sense of drive. They got to be the one doing all the talking and everything.
Take control of the situation, and underneath is an underlying insecurity. They don't know who they are, so they're going to tell you who they are, and you will be impressed by them. This doesn't work, does it? Kind of backfires.
But it shows the danger of being too involved in human organizations, getting all wrapped up in human organizations. I mean, Jesus, along the way, he was tempted, right? There were probably a lot of people who thought he should be king, right? I mean, that was the rumor going around. And yet, he wanted nothing to do with it. He wanted nothing to do with anything human.
And he made a very important, strong point to his disciples. So like whosoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple.
Yes.
Yep.
And to me, in the lesson, it's like the serpent that whispers, and you do little things that are controlling others, but really the dragon ends up being tyranny that was trying to control all.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, the lesson says the Adam, I forget how it puts it, but it starts out mildly. That's just what you were saying. It seems kind of mild. A little controlling here, a little controlling there. And then it becomes the tyranny.
Oh, that's interesting, because the serpent spoke subtly.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if it came with a big trumpet blast, you would know it was there.
The tree is to be desired.
Is that you, Mike?
And then, well, yes, my guess reversal of that question is then how does a good entity like Plainfield go forth to reverse that? Because somebody has to say something at some point.
Well, you stand up to it. You say no. And you know that it is God that is governing. And you are willing to take whatever the consequences are, knowing that you're one with God.
Are you asking how does someone in Plainfield stand up to someone who's bombastic?
No. What I meant was the reversal of the idea that, like, the person who comes in and says it's my way or the highway as a new manager, and then you stand up to them, but rather, how does that new person come in seeing that things aren't quite right, like Plainfield comes into a nearby Christian Science church, for example, sees things aren't quite right. So without offending anybody, but something could or should be said, try to get them back on the right track.
I would suggest people come to church, these other churches, and tell them this.
Well, I think something has been said with the example that's being lived here. So, not necessarily telling someone, but the example is being given.
Yeah.
Yeah, a good example speaks volumes.
I would imagine, like in Jesus' time, that people would cast you out, like they did him out of the synagogue. They cast people out, spoke up.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't do any miracles in his hometown.
Yeah.
He went where he was sent, where he was directed by God, where there were some receptive people.
Yeah, that's the point. You have to
Actually,
do it.
that kind of makes me think, because Jesus' motive was to prove the resurrection in a way. So he didn't go out of his way not to offend people. And I recall Mary Baker Eddy saying that if she had been as strong-worded as Jesus, she would have been crucified also. So, in other words, she, like you're saying, set an example, talked quietly and kindly, and it didn't rile up she did rile up opposition, but not to the extent that it was thrown against Jesus.
No, let's be clear on this. She riled up a huge amount of opposition. She was not physically crucified because it was illegal in the United States at that time. But she was mentally crucified. She understood exactly what Jesus went through because she went through what Jesus went through. She offended a huge number of people, as Jesus did. And if you're living the right life, there will be people who will be offended. So be prepared.
Yeah, there's no way you can get around it, and you can't fear that. But it goes back to what Gary was saying. You have to feel so motivated by God and what you're doing, and not by human will, but by God, and then also to be praying about it, knowing you are speaking to another child of God if there's any receptivity. But God will send you, and sometimes you will offend people, and sometimes our example offends people. That's the Christ will offend the human mind. That's just the way of it.
So, were we talking about somebody who comes to like the Plainfield Church and stirs things up? And
I think he was talking about if we go somewhere else.
I was
Oh,
right, and I really appreciate that clarification because that's exactly what I meant. Was that Mary Baker Eddy wasn't physically crucified; she was mentally crucified. But that's what I'm sure she meant, was that if she had gone that extra step, and I think that Christ, well, Jesus recognized that, but he went all the way and suffered the physical consequence, or the whatever you want to call it, of being crucified, whereas Mary Baker Eddy was mentally crucified, and I totally agree with that.
And Mrs. Evans taking her stand against Boston, she was too. It's why the watches were started. She was in agony all the time. She couldn't sleep at night. And she did stand up, and she was a one feisty person, and they didn't like it. So, and it will it happens today. As you stand up, others won't like it. Sometimes you have to. If you can do it with a gentle manner, I always think that's the best way first. But if that doesn't work, then sometimes it's needed more. And I'm beginning to feel a little more and more that maybe it is time to go into some of these churches, branch churches, and stir things up and wake people up. Maybe it's time. It hasn't been time. The doors have totally been closed. But, who is telling of the foe in ambush? So, I mean, we did for a long time. We sent letters. We did everything we could, and no one was interested. So we stopped. But maybe it's time again to ruffle the waves of mortal minds.
Stir the muddy.
Yeah.
I really like that because my past was I knew Christian Scientists for 30 years, and they never told me once what they believed in, even though I was always whining about everything that was wrong in the world, wrong in my life. And it wasn't until I one day stopped by and something came up about it, and then I asked them, "What do you believe?" And they said, "Well, you might not believe this." And it's like, well, no, what do you believe? I'm not asking you what I believe. I'm asking you what you believe. And they were so defensive and not wanting to say anything. So, maybe I wouldn't have woke up 30 years earlier, but I wish I had the opportunity.
Right.
So I like what you said, Mary. That's
and it's never too late.
No, it's never too late. And the truth is out there, and our mental work has a great effect in people finding us, and also in just the leaven of truth at work, waking people up, whether we ever see them or they ever have any contact with us or not. It's the leaven of truth at work.
Well, I think things have changed. When I was growing up, I kept being told as I was growing up that the church was going to grow, they were going to do this, they were going to do that, all these wonderful things. And then my observation was, I don't really see it. So there was kind of a disconnect. But, these days, that disconnect doesn't exist anymore. I think everybody in the Boston church knows that it's failing. They can't help it. So many churches have closed. And the churches are so empty. I mean, there's not this disconnect anymore. I don't think Christian Science kids growing up today are going to being told that, oh, the church is going to grow and there are going to be branch churches all over the world. I don't think they say that anymore.
They do say that. That's an unfortunate
They
story.
still do?
They do.
Okay.
Well, actually, what they say now is that numbers don't matter.
Oh, God.
And yet it's all the human. It's all a humanized concept of Christian Science, isn't it? Because what really matters? Are the sick being healed? Is sin being eliminated, repented, forsaken?
Christian Science being understood.
Yeah, is it being lived?
Yeah, and that's what really matters, wherever that is happening, churches or outside of churches, it being understood.
And Mary Baker Eddy said that this was for everybody.
It is.
Well, it is. It's
it is.
It's the laws that govern everybody.
Right, but this is why I have this argument with them when they say that numbers don't matter. I said, well, numbers don't matter, but Mrs. Eddy said it was for everybody. So then it doesn't matter if the churches are empty and healing isn't going on. It definitely matters.
Right. Well, that's just a sign of the moral depravity that has infiltrated the movement. That's why
that's the truth.
That's why what we're doing is so important. There is a light in the world. We can't hide it under a bushel.
Nor can we worry about offending people if you're just stating the truth or telling of the foe in ambush. And there is a way that's obnoxious that offends people, but this is something different.
Some people are going to be offended no matter what you do.
Well, that's absolutely true.
Right. So you wipe the dust off your feet and move on.
I got to think, because Mike thinks or knows that if he was told 30 years earlier the truth, it would make a difference. There's people in these branch churches that feel the same way and will be very receptive to hearing it.
Yeah, you never know where you're going to find a receptive heart.
I should not have been receptive. I know that. So I feel for me, too, if I'm receptive, then there's a lot of people out there that would be.
And Jeremy wasn't in the church. Oh,
Actually, if there was somebody with less likelihood, it would have been me.
Yeah.
So there's hope for all of us, right?
Exactly. That's what I keep telling that's what I keep telling people, is that I was a double card carrying atheist. Look at me now. Now I'm telling you about God.
Well, that's
wonderful.
Well, that's a good story, Mike.
That's good.
Yeah.
But actually, one of the warnings, anybody who hasn't learned in this and hasn't experienced it, I did experience the mental opposition, because when I received the bound volumes from my church, I didn't want the new ones, so I offered them to a little branch church, and they wanted a couple of them, so I took them down on a Wednesday evening. I left home, everything was harmonious and beautiful, and much to my shock and horror, the whole reading on Wednesday night was done out of the Message, and I just didn't know what to do. And then when a practitioner got up and praised the thing, finally I stood up and did it in the context of that this was offensive to the founder of the church, Mary Baker Eddy. If it had been something offensive to me, I would have let it go. But I just could not sit there and let this be done and not say anything. And the fascinating thing was that when I got home, it was like a bomb had dropped on the house. Everything was in chaos. And I had to call up a practitioner to bail me out, because I didn't know how to handle the animal magnetism or malpractice or whatever that came with that.
Well, and that's the other thing is you're not taught how to. Here you're taught to. When you're taught, whatever comes upon you, you can handle because you line upon line, precept upon precept. Is Elizabeth here? Elizabeth, did you want to say anything? I know Elizabeth has talked to people in her former church.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked a little bit, and I found some receptivity. So it's just, and I don't push anything. I'm just there explaining some things. So, but I haven't, gone back to do anything. It's just, some people coming to me, just wondering where I am, and having lunch with them and just kind of discussing things.
That's a good way to open thought. And there was someone who she spoke to who knew everything that was actually going on, and was reading unauthorized literature. So there are those too. I know.
but was still a member of the organization. But Mike, the experience that you went through, it's that kind of experience that builds spiritual muscle.
Mike mentioned the readings from the Message, and somebody might want to clarify that in case you're not familiar with the Message.
Well, the Message is a non-Bible, and it wasn't in existence when Mary Baker Eddy. It's just a new thing. And when I've tried to compare things like that to the King James Bible, I mean, it's not even relevant. I don't think the person that wrote the Message even calls it a Bible. I think they call it more of a commentary.
I had heard that it was a translation of the Bible made by a Jesuit priest.
Right. Well, if we don't take a stand now for Christian Science, we're going to see readers reading from the Quran someday.
I'm sorry.
So we've got our work out for us.
Can I ask a question? This is Karen.
Sure.
I have a question. Why? What about the battle is the Lord's?
It is. It is.
We should have more faith in God to do this, shouldn't we?
Yes, and when you are directed by God, you do what God directs you to do, knowing that it is His battle, not a personal battle. And that's how you handle the mental malpractice that comes back at you when you do take a stand.
It is His battle, but Mrs. Eddy says we're warriors in this battle. So that's another thing. The culture likes to just sit in their chair and say it's God's battle, God is love, and then good night, everyone. I've done my mental work.
Right. The fact that it's God's battle doesn't mean you don't have something.
I think it's hard. I think it's very hard work to let God have the battle, because you want to help and you feel like, what is my mission in that? What is my mission in that? We have something to do.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do.
We have a lot to do, okay?
And we have our watches, in which we can include this.
Yes, we can.
We do.
And God directs action you
Never
take.
through human will is what you think that.
No, that's it.
That's
not
the
human
point.
will and not your will, but God's will. And the more you reflect Him, the more you'll know what to do and be a warrior in the battle. But it is God's battle. It's not a personal battle, a personal vendetta. It's a God's battle. Shall we move on, or anyone else?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Next question.
Yes.
Number 3, what is the difference to eat with higher people when bidden than doing it on one's own behest?
So what's the difference between eating with other people rather than eating by yourself?
Yes, that's right.
Well, what I mean is by imposing yourself in with the higher, more honorable.
Oh, okay.
Seems like it goes back to what Plainfield speaks a lot of, is you have to demonstrate and earn your way. You don't just place yourself somewhere, the high position of reader or whatever. You have to demonstrate it.
I think this goes back to what Florence just said. It's a matter of being sent by God, God's will, rather than going because it's my will.
Yeah, you always be careful of personal ambition. What you want for yourself, for the same thing. It's usually insecurity that wants to be praised by man. You should have no ambition, not any human ambition. Your one ambition would only be to reflect God, and in doing so, you will be placed, and God will promote you. You'll be placed in certain situations and circumstances where you can be the most good and do the most good. But when you push it yourself and you want to be something and you're ambitious, that's like a red flag. No. And even if, you seem to get overlooked, or maybe you think people have made bad choices, you just keep hanging in there, because eventually it will come out right.
I think the thought.
Oh, go ahead.
No, the thought that your place is in God, and it will be revealed. It unfolds. I think that's a really good thought to hold on to. Because we all have our place, the right place for us, where we do the most good, and it's God who directs.
Yes.
Right. And he that humbleth himself shall be exalted.
One of the interesting things I came upon was, so the lesson here is the need to be humble, to express humility, but then it points out that how about people who just appear humble, because they know that we're supposed to be humble, but it's not really something within themselves. It's not really something they're feeling. And in this little story about General Lee was shared, that I'll read because it's short, but it certainly makes this point. It says, a well-known incident in the life of General Robert E. Lee occurred while that Southern gentleman was riding on a train to Richmond, Virginia. The general was seated at the rear, and all the other places were filled with officers and soldiers. An elderly woman, poorly dressed, entered the coach at one of the stations. Having no seat to offer her, she trudged down the aisle and to the back of the car. Immediately, Lee stood up and gave her his place. One man after another then arose to give the general his seat. No, gentlemen, he said, if there is none for this lady, then there can be none for me. General Lee knew that good manners and humility demand consideration for people in all walks of life, not merely for those of high social ranking like himself.
That's beautiful.
Very good.
He was a great man, General Lee. And he was asked to be the general for the Union, but he felt he couldn't desert his home. But, well, yes. So
that kind of takes us to question number 4, doesn't it?
Well, actually, I want to ask one little sub question on 3 was, does motive play a part? Because I have come to eat with Plainfield, so because they're higher up. So is that a bad thing because you want to commune with people that know more than I do?
Well, part of humility is honesty, and if you recognize this to be good as a matter of conscience instead of any other personal considerations, then maybe you could say it's the lowest seat in the best context, if that makes sense.
Well,
thank you. It makes a lot of sense.
Well, and also, it's all a matter of reflection. And just because you're new doesn't necessarily mean that you're the least when you're reflecting. And just because you've been here a long time doesn't mean you're so great if you're not reflecting. So we are all equal. I agree this about the story of General Lee, and we all learn from each other, and we all should keep that stance of humility, and no one here is thinking they've arrived or that they're better than anybody else, because that's human and it's rank error.
And you've come to learn. You haven't come to preach.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful.
And that, I think that answers the other person's comment too, to a certain degree, that one knows then if somebody has humility by judging the actions, because coming in I wouldn't have known that people here are humble. But now from listening and participating, I definitely see the humility and the allowing, well, people like me to run a Bible lesson, so that's absolutely appreciated. Okay,
well, yeah,
so
fake humility is pretty, it sticks out, that story. Uriah Heep, who was in the Dickens book, you know, he was just a fake. He wasn't humble. He was pretending to be humble. And most people, you can feel that fake. Yeah. And real humility is strong. It's not, as we talked about the other week, self-deprecating. Not at all. It knows who and what it is. And it knows that it's under God, and God is the only good. That's where the humility comes.
Yeah, I love the sense of quiet strength that it has. It does have strength. Sorry.
Right. And when you see it clearly, it is the only strength there is.
The only strength. God given.
So, Mike, I would say that motive has everything to do with it. Because, and also, it depends on what you think the word higher means. You said you came to Plainfield because you thought it was higher. But in what sense did you think it was higher?
Consciousness, understanding of God, Christian Science.
Yeah. And that's a good motive.
Which is funny because I learned about motives here. So that's a wonderful thing. They never really understood the rule for motive in Acts until I think one time Mary talked about it, and it's like, wow, well, that's a really wonderful thing. So shall we move to number 4?
Yes.
What does it mean, he that has ears to hear, let him hear?
This reminded me a little bit about that story about the rich man and Lazarus, where Abraham's going, well, they have Moses and the prophets, let them listen to them. And it's about what they want to listen to and how they want to listen with their heart.
Thank you.
Very nice.
In Matthew Henry, he says, God requires no more from us than the right use of the faculties he has given us. People are ignorant because they will not learn. And then he says, too, self must be denied. The bent, the frame, and temper of the mind must be altered.
And he's telling us that when we hear someone say something, how do we hear what we're hearing? Do we take what they say it superficially? Or do we listen with our spiritual sense and discern what's really being said? A good practitioner will hear a lot more than what someone is saying.
Which practitioner will hear.
Right? I mean, a lot of people will call a practitioner and they'll talk about one thing when in fact the real problem is something that they're afraid to talk about. And a good practitioner will discern that. And how will a practitioner discern that?
Spiritual sense.
Exactly. So we have to listen with our spiritual sense. When someone opens their mouth, when a politician opens their mouth and tells you a lie.
Because that surely they do that. Surely the media.
I know that hardly ever happens.
Yeah.
Do you have the spiritual sense to know that they're full of BS? Or do you, or if they're telling you the truth, to discern that as well?
You know, Mrs. Eddy's definition of ears in the glossary is not organs of the so-called corporeal senses, but spiritual understanding. Jesus said, referring to spiritual perception, having ears, hear ye not. So all our faculties, as we develop them in the spiritual sense of them, they're not based and limited on this material eyeball or material eardrum or whatever. They're spiritual, and as you develop your spiritual senses, all of your faculties will be quite keen. I thought it was interesting because one of the commentaries that spoke on this, he that hath ears to hear, let him hear, he turned it into the story of Adam and Eve, and the story of Eve. Because he said originally she had this great connection, this bond with a loving Father God, and listened to this loving Father God, and had a bond of confidence with him. Then what happened?
He was beguiled.
And the serpent came along. And where did the serpent come from? Not from God.
No, it was the liar, the deceiver, the opposite of God. And what did Eve was doing what? She was listening to it with her so-called ears. And then it said it gets her all confused. She starts arguing and talking with it. She's succumbing to it. She loses her confidence and her trust in God, and she believes that God is a liar and doubts his goodness.
Well, and there was that desire to elevate herself because it's going to make her wise. That's what the serpent's telling. It's just going to make you wise.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly how it talks. It flatters you. It offers you something you think you don't have, or something that you want, something that you think God isn't giving you, maybe.
Or make her as God.
Absolutely make her as God.
Because obviously she's lacking something, so she thinks.
So it's a great example of this listening process and who and what you're listening to and how it works and how it leads to Adam and
fallen man.
Fallen man, flat on your face. And it happens today. You can say it's an allegory, but man, it is applicable to everybody all the time.
All the time. And one of the definitions from the 1828 dictionary for hear was to obey, and that was very new to me, so it definitely makes sense here. Who am I obeying or willing to obey? Exactly.
See, that 1828 dictionary, my goodness, is that ever inspired? Go ahead.
So just
the definition for what?
Hear, the word hear. One was to learn and one was to obey.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Tom.
Oh, I thought I'd just give an example out of the Bible. So there was Herod, who was the grandson of Herod when Jesus was born, okay? There were multiple Herods, you know? And they said that he had a voice like a god, and he glorified himself. And then he was sick and he died very suddenly and very violently. But he stopped listening to God. I don't know if he ever listened, but he certainly was not listening to God. And basically self-destructed.
Yeah, it will self-destruct. That's why I will hear no other voices. I will heed no other call, as the hymn says. When you start listening to that voice, and as we talked about, it starts out mildly, it seems very acceptable, it's subtle, seems okay, yeah, that makes sense. Why shouldn't I be able to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Why not? Who says I can't? Why am I being bossed around by God? Why do I have to obey God? Who is God anyway? I'm not grateful for all this wonderful paradise I have here. There might be something better.
Yeah, like I can see good and evil.
Right.
Yeah.
It just takes you down that path, and it gets more and more aggressive, and it is persuasive. And just as Tom just said, Herod spoke well. Well, my understanding is Hitler spoke well. He was very charismatic. Some of these, the word, that's the ploy of the devil, is to be charismatic.
I'm sure the serpent that Eve listened to was quite charismatic.
I think Eustace's article on how evil argues is very good.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And also, Mary, one time when you said that, evil, it comes as a traveler, and then you accept it as a guest, pretty soon it's a master in your home. So,
That's right.
Master.
Yeah, traveler, guest, master.
Thank you.
Yeah, so good questions, good things to think about.
And that was an invitation, somebody inviting themselves in on the wrong motives.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why in your home, you have to be careful. You just don't open the door to anyone and invite them in to talk to you, nor do you accept all these phone calls that we get these days and solicitations. Shut them up. Hang up. Don't talk to it. We must be that firm and strong with these suggestions of the serpent, because it will go into a dragon, and it would seem in the Adam dream to cause you to have a big fall.
These salesmen don't go door to door anymore. They come through your television.
Television.
Right. Very, very careful what you let into your home through your television.
Your television, your computer, all these ways it enters. They have subliminal messages. If you're not alert and awake, it'll put you to sleep. That's why, sometimes I wonder, how can people believe some of this stuff? How can people follow it and believe it? Well, they're mesmerized into believing it. Nobody in their right mind would believe some of this garbage that's put out, or even be interested in it for that matter. They're mesmerized already. I go back, that movie, the Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It just took everybody over. And so as long as there are a few awake and working, we can awaken the whole scene. See the New Jerusalem, the truth about man, which is unfallen, upright, pure, and free.
So thank you, Mike.
Great. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mike.
Good question.
Thank you all
Great
who
questions,
contributed.
yes. Thank you all.
welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Call recording off. Goodbye.